Hi, I'm Zan and welcome to this video on how to build containers for your website and stay consistent. This video is part of the Into the Wild Easy Build series and it is a true start of building a web page. Yep, we are truly starting it now. So in this video, we are going to take our design from Figma that looks like this into HTML that looks like this. And then we'll be adding the content in the later videos. So let's get into it. This video is centered around creating the card system for the homepage of the website, and it is built upon the previous episodes of the series. If you haven't watched them, obviously, I recommend you do so, and the cards for the series should be showing up right now. However, if you just want to jump straight in, then that's fine too. There's a link in the description to download the starter file for the session, as well as the index.html file to work on if you don't want to use PHP or don't have a web server. You may want these files since we will be using a couple of the CSS variables we declared previously in the series. Which means it's time for me to remind you of my free pen drive system that includes the Laragon web server software. If you don't know what I'm on about, please check the playlist being shown in the corner about there. It's all free software which I put into a single easy to use package to help you code. If you have been following along and have already created the base pages from before, then there are no additional files to download as we will be creating everything we need in this session. As said in the intro, we are not going to be adding content to our page here. It is just the containers that will house them. That is for the next video. Now, quick disclaimer, I will often use the term relative positioning and natural flow positioning for the same thing. They are, to be fair, slightly different, but for what we're going to do, we can class them as the same. So if you hear those terms, just remember they're the same thing here. So looking at our Figma design for the homepage, we can see it's basically made out of three different types of cards. We've got these two big ones up the top here, which span across the entire page. We have these middle ones, in which are 3 abreast, and these teeny tiny ones, which are 4 aside. But what about this advert at the top? Well, we're going to pretend it's not there for the moment, and we're doing this on purpose because we're going to be exploiting this in another video. You can see there are some similarities between the cards. We've got these rounded corners on the drop shadow, and the smaller ones also have a kind of banner system which we may be able to incorporate or not. However, it does mean that we can create some CSS already for the similarities between the cards. But where should we put the CSS? That is the question. We could decide to put the card code in with the base CSS, but we aren't going to do that because, number one, it may not be a style that we're going to replicate throughout the entire site, although maybe we should do. We could as well just create a CSS file just for the index, the homepage, and that is another common idea to do. But what if we want to use it on more than one page, but not on every page? We could end up getting conflicts of CSS rules. The best solution is to create a CSS file just for the cards. This allows it to be used on other pages if we decide that we want to use it on them, as well as making it portable so that we can use the same CSS rules on other websites that we may want to design later on. So with that in mind, let us create that file. So we're going to be in the CSS folder here, and we're going to select new file, and we're going to call this cards.css. So what we're going to do now is to create the index.php page. We're going to do that by opening up the base page first, and then we're going to resave it as index. And this is the whole point of having the base.php page, is that it is our starter page for all of the other files we are going to create. Obviously, if you're just going to do this in HTML, that's fine. I've already given you a index.html file to start with. So the next thing we need to do is to obviously link up the CSS file to the index page. And so we put it underneath our base page. So again, we're going to use Emmet to help us here. We're going to use link CSS. We're going to delete that word style, and we're going to put in CSS because that's the folder, /, and then we can just select cards.css. And of course, we need to save that so that we've now got our connection. So now we are going to go over to the cards.css file and start creating some rules. So we are going to be using the Ben naming method. If you aren't sure what that is, then there is a video en route about it, and it should be in the Getting Started playlist, which is what we put up earlier on, but hopefully I've put the card up again now for you. There's also a link obviously in the description. We will make a class called card, and that will be the block level element. Think of it as the parent to the rest of the CSS. We're going to give it a background color of white, which is of course our secondary variable color. We're going to give it a border radius of 2m, which is 20 pixels, and a shadow of 6 pixels to the right and bottom, with 6 pixels also being used for the blur and using the 50% transparent background color, which is our tertiary color trans. Let's give them a default top and bottom margin, and then finally let us set the display property to inline block so that they share the line. In case you're wondering where these values come from, it is from the design in Figma, although I think I might have increased the shadow slightly. As you can see here, the shadow and blur is at 5 pixels, not 6, but the rest of the values will be from Figma itself. We can also use Figma now to actually find the correct sizes for our boxes. Now, we did actually make grey boxes for our system, so we can just unhide them to display them. So this is the grey box for the large card, the values. We go down, we have the medium cards, there's the values, and then we have the small cards, and there's the values there. And this is the point of actually doing these grey boxes in the first place, so we can reference them in the building of the simple design system. So our large card is 1350 across, 670 down. Our medium card is 390 across and 225 high. And the small card is 300 wide by 200 high. Making these classes are easy, and we will be using the block modifier notation for this. For the large card, we're going to be using the max width and min height setting. Although these terms are obvious for what they do, the more important question is why are we using them? The max width will stop the card from getting any wider and stopping it looking too stretched on high resolution monitors. We want to use min height because we want to ensure that the height is enough to hold the content at the max width value of the card, but allow it to grow if the card width is reduced, allowing for some minor responsiveness in the page itself. We're also going to want to reset the display property to block, so we only have one on the line at a time. And there we have it. So we have the rules now for the card generic and for the large card modifier. For the small medium cards, we're just going to use the normal width and height attributes as these are small enough already. It's time for you to try and do the medium and small cards on your own. So please pause this video whilst you're doing that, because the answer is coming up on your screen in 3, 2, 1, now. It's now time to save this file and move over to the index.php to actually add the sections so we can see them. So we start writing the actual card information in between the start of base and end of base comments here, and we'll obviously get rid of this. And as usual, we should use Emmet to create this. So we're going to go for section, and we're going to use .card for the first card class, and then card double hyphen large for the modifier. And of course we want 2 of them, so we do *2 or *2, and press enter, and all we need to do now is just to clean it up a little bit, and there we have it. We're using the section tag here for semantic reasons. Next we have the medium cards. Now these cards we will be animating a bit later on, so we're actually going to need a front and back card for each physical card we will see. Since there will be 3 cards, we need to create 6 cards in total, 3 for the front and 3 for the back. Now the easiest way to create this with Emmet is to create 6 cards first, with all of them having the third modifier as the same, and then manually change them later on. So the Emmet code will look like this. Notice there is only 1 dash between the words medium and front, and not 2. And that is because although it is a variant of the medium card, it's still a modifier of the original parent card type, and not a modifier of the medium itself, if that kind of makes sense. We also can start to see the limitations of the bend method here, as we are now at 3 card CSS rules deep. And soon, believe it or not, we're probably going to have to add a 4th one. So now we have our 6 cards. Time to rename that last modifier. And to do that, we can use the Alt-click rule to modify them at once. So let's do that. So Alt and click, and then we can delete the word front and type in the word back. Make sure you click off so you don't start messing with all of them again. Now we have done that, we don't really want to deal with the back cards yet, simply because that is an advanced bit of CSS that we will come back once the page is completed. Remember, it's better to have a completed and okay website today than a perfect website tomorrow, mainly because tomorrow may never come and people may still spend money on a website today if we actually have one. So we're going to create a quick CSS rule to do this, to hide them completely. So here's the CSS that we need. You can see I added it here for the medium, and whilst I was here, we did it for the small one as well. So back to the PHP file. So very quick tidying up of these cards, just to make them easier to write in, like we've done with the large ones. So this is the style I'm using. I've got a space between the fronts so we can see it, and a space between the end of the back cards and to the front. In fact, we could add an extra line in there to make it clearer. Oops, wrong one. See, helps make it clearer of the separation between the cards. Now it's time to do the small cards, which obviously are going to be entered in here. Again, these are going to need a front and back because we're going to be animating them. And we're going to need 4 sets of cards, so 8 in total. And it's down to you now to create these cards yourself. So pause the video because the answer will be shown in 3, 2, 1, now. So this is the Emmet rule that we need to create it. And there we have our cards. So again, what we need to do is again to modify every other one from front to back, like so. And as always, we're just going to format them so they look a little bit nicer, like so. Time to save it all and see what it looks like. Well, it looks like I've done a whoopsie here because the background color here is green and not white, which means I'd probably set it to the primary background color rather than the secondary background color. So let's go and have a quick look at that. In fact, we can see I actually forgot to put the background color in at all, which is a bit of a boo-boo. So let's do that now. So background color, secondary color, save that, and again back to viewing. So now we've got the cards visible. Okay, it's looking good, but not quite perfect. As we scroll down to see the others, we can see that the spacings are all out, and this small card should be down here. So some work to be done there. But also, if we just look a little bit closer and we press F12 so that we can go into the developer's console, and we can see the wrapper that's nicely centered. We can see that the navigation bar is nicely centered, and our large card is not. Okay, now this is a really simple fix to do, so we shall do that straight away. We go back into the code, and it's really down to this margin rule here. Okay, so we've got a top and bottom margin of 2 rem and a left and right of 0. If we change that to auto, just like we did with the navigation bar, we'll see, hopefully, that now when we refresh this page, we can see that the large card has moved in, and so that is now also perfectly aligned. When we scroll down to get the other card, it's still not the same story because they are set as inline block. Now, there's one thing that we're going to have to accept with these smaller cards, in that we're going to lose some level of responsiveness. And that is because there isn't a way of doing auto margins that will work properly in between these cards, especially to keep them centered. So we're going to have to do a little bit of magic to work our way around that, but we will lose responsiveness. Our first step is to work out the margin needed for this first card, so it brings it in line with the large card. And this takes a little bit of maths. Now, we know the wrapper of our page is 1500 pixels or 150 rem. And we know that the large card is 135 rem or 1350. So we take this away from the wrapper and we get 15 rem or 150 pixels. If we drop that into 2, that'll give us 75 pixels or 7.5 rem, which is what the margin is when we've got a large enough page. So that means we need to apply this 7.5 rem left margin to our first card. Since we only want to do it to our first card and we're trying to keep within the BEM naming system, we're going to need to give it an additional class, which will of course be a modifier. Since we have 3 cards and all our 3 cards are going to have different images, we can see that we have jungle, wolf, and survival. And so that's what we're going to be using as our modifiers. But we could just use card 1, card 2, card 3 if we wanted. I just like them being more descriptive of the actual card itself. So we're going to go back into the index page first and add these modifiers. We will need to add them to both the front and back of the cards. And again, this is what I said before, we can start to see why people don't use the BEM method, because the length of the classes will get very long. So here we are now with the additional classes added to the sections. And as you can see, like I said before, these are getting extremely long. However, let's carry on. So time to go into the cards.css to add this rule. So here we are in cards.css, and you can see I've added the 3 additional classes, and I've added the 7.5 rem to the medium jungle, and the other 2 are empty. And the reason for that is we've got to work out how big the margin for those 2 cards are going to be. And we want those 2 cards to be spread out evenly. So once again, we're going to need to do a bit of maths. If we're going to do this using absolute partitioning, this would be no issue whatsoever. But because we're trying to do this a little bit responsiveness, it does take a little bit of extra work. So our goal is to have an even space between the 3 cards and have the last card's right-hand edge still match up with the right-hand edge of the large card. So how wide are the 3 cards combined? Each card, as we know, is 390 pixels or 39 rem each. So combining them together gives us 117 rem. We know the large card is 135 rem. So taking the one from the other, that will give us 18 rems left over. Since we want these 2 spaces, we divide that 18 rem by 2. That gives us 9 rem. So that is the left-hand margin that we need for both. So let's go back into the code. We could put the margin left of 9 rem into each of the medium cards down here. However, since we've got these modifiers underneath the medium card, if we actually put it into the medium card first, because the jungle one is below this, this will override this rule. So this will stay at 7.5 rem, but both wolf and survival will actually be spread out. So let's just check this. We'll save it. We go over to the page. We're going to refresh the page, and there you have it. I believe it's perfectly aligned. It does sometimes look like it's a bit over, but I'm going to believe my maths that is correct. And that leaves us with our 4 cards at the bottom. And this is where you're going to earn your money and prove your knowledge. You are going to do this by yourself. So let me just give you the bits of information that you need to be able to do this. Each card's going to need its own modifier. So it's going to be forest, mountain, camping, and kite. Again, we're going to need front and backs modifiers added. So if you're ready to do this, pause this video now until you're ready to look at the answer, because the answer's coming in 3, 2, 1. Now. So the first thing we need to do is to add the modifiers to all of our cards. And here we have them. Forest, mountain, camping, kite. Next, we're going to need to add the margin to the very first card, and we already know the value of that, which is 7.5 rem. So here we have the forest modifier with the margin left at 7.5 rem, and we've also got the empty classes that we're going to need later on. Next, we need to add the margins for the others, which again we need to calculate. So we have 4 sections, each at 300 pixels or 30 rems each. That makes 1200 pixels or 120 rem. We know that again, 1350 pixels or 135 rem is the large card. So we take one away from the other, and that gives us 150 pixels or 15 rem. Now that number needs to be divided by 3 because we've got 3 spaces to put them in, or 3 gaps. 150 divided by 3 gives us 50 pixels or 5 rem. Okay, and we can put a margin right of 0 if we need to as well. So we can put that into the small. So we're going to do margin left of 5 rems. If we want, just for clarity, we're going to do margin right of 0, but we shouldn't really need that. So we save that and let's have a look. Control F5 to force a refresh and look at that. It looks basically perfect, but there is a slight issue. Look how we've got a smaller gap here than we do here and here. So what's going on? Now, this is something known as margin collapse, okay? And again, using the developers tool really helps us to see it. So when we have a look at our large cards, you can see that the top one, top 2 cards, you can see that the margin has collapsed, okay? So the bottom margin of 2 rem there has merged or collapsed with the top margin of 2 rem with the large card below it. When we come down to these, however, we can see that the large card has its margin there, and the card below it also has its margin, but they haven't collapsed. They are additional, okay? And we can see that's the case with the others. And when we go down to the small ones, we get the same issue. So small cards there have got the top margin, and they are separate from the medium card. How margin collapses can be a bit difficult to explain. However, the fix to this is relatively straightforward. All we need to do is to go back into our CSS, go up to the top. What we're going to do is modify the top margin here. And so we're going to turn it into the 4 value system, top, right, bottom, left. So we're going to keep 2 rem for the top, auto for the right, 0 for the bottom, and auto for the left. We can save that, go back to our page, refresh, and now we have consistent height, as we can see that now they have collapsed with the large card, and likewise when we look at the bottom ones, we can see that they have indeed kept to just that 2 rem margin. So zooming out, we can see now that all our cards are in the correct place, which means my job here is done. In the next session, like we said before, we are going to be looking at actually adding the content to these sections. So thank you for staying with me all the way. If there's a video you want me to do, as always, please let me know. If you want me to do a shout out, please let me know. Just whack it in the comments below, as I do read every comment. And I'll see you guys next time. This is Sen, signing off.